Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is Deborah Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. Today is International Day of Persons with Disabilities, so I have a great guest for you. My guest today is Mary Dolan, and she's the Executive Director and the co-founder of the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee, and FDR stands for Franklin Roosevelt. Del, right? Correct me now.
Delano.
Delano. I thought, no, that sounds wrong. Delano. I just always, FDR. So, and FDR was a great president. He was a great president in the United States. And so we want to talk about what is happening to FDR Memorial Legacy Committee. We're actually very proud as a community that FDR had a disability. He was in a wheelchair, and we want to talk about that during this conversation as well, because FDR is a very, very important part of our history and our legacy. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone knew what Mary Dolan and her team are doing, and also let her talk to us a little bit about history and what they hope to continue to accomplish with their efforts. But at the same time, how can we help? Because this is a very, very important legacy that our community needs to get behind to really support. So Mary, thank you. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm absolutely thrilled, and it makes it even more memorable given that it is December 3rd, a really important day for our community.
I agree. So Mary, tell us how you got involved with the memorial. I mean, it's an interesting place to be. So tell us how you got to where you are.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And this was one of those things when, you get out of grad school and you got that fire in your belly, you want to work for an organization doing good stuff in the world. And I had the good fortune of getting hired by the National Organization on Disability, which was led by some real titans of the disability community and had the allyship of other titans in the disability leadership. And not long after I joined, the organization sort of set its sights on changing the face and plan for the FDR Memorial, and said, if the FDR Memorial is not going to have a display the disability of this president, we are going to campaign, lobby, grassroots, do all the things one needs to do to make that change. And so I joined the organization as a young staffer and got to see, I like to say, how the sausage gets made in Washington. And now 20 plus years later, am feeling like I'm doing the next part of our work, which is to make sure that story gets embedded into the history of the memorial.
And I think that's so important. And, I don't know if we can say FDR was the first, major leader that had a disability. I know other leaders. I know there was a leader in Thailand that was blind. And so there are others, but it was certainly the first president of the United States. And we're very proud of that. And it was also a very different time. It was a time when, unfortunately, there's still people that believe that if you have a disability, that somehow it makes you less than, which I totally disagree with. I know you do as well, Mary, but why is there significance to have FDR? I certainly have my opinion about this, but a statue of FDR in his wheelchair, which is, by the way, who he was as an individual.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, first off, I think we have to recognize that representation matters. It always has. And so there we were. It was 1995. It was 5 years after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And y'all preaching to the choir here, but that wasn't the first important law that passed to help to create the rights for our community. But that's one that a lot of people know about. So there we were 5 years after the ADA passage, and saying, well, this president used a wheelchair every day in the White House. Was it even considered to show him as a person with disability? And the reaction of, well, of course not. Well, why would we do that? He didn't want it. Nobody wanted it. Nobody knew. Some people knew. Oh, if they knew, they didn't, they were told not to. All these stories, all these stories. And so it became something, a matter of power and pride of our community to say, well, there's nothing wrong with the fact that this man happened to lead the world and do all these great things. And he did it while using a wheelchair. Not trying to make this overly a heroic thing, but it's just the way it was. So why wouldn't you show a person in an accurate portrayal, especially if you're using something as a learning instrument for future generations?
Right. And the reality is a wheelchair is a tool for us to use. And it's not something to be ashamed of. And also, as you said, Mary, representation has never mattered more. It's always mattered, but we're really understanding that as and really being able to bring our best to everything that we do, our best into the education, into every aspect of our lives, and really owning who we are, I think is really important. So it feels at a time, we're recording this in 2020 when we're all in the midst of this pretty horrific pandemic, and Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movements and all these things where, once again, as you said, representation matters. So the fact that he used a wheelchair as a tool, a very big tool in his life, actually, to get around, I think is a very important part of history. And like you said, maybe when he was the president, certainly when he was the president, we weren't valuing the idea that you can truly be your entire self. We've been hiding who we are for a long time. I mean, you can go, there's so many grounded explanations of that, but really honoring the entire man, which one part of this and really, really important leader to our country in the United States was that he was a wheelchair user. And so I think that's something that we need to celebrate and we need to make very visible and very, regardless of whether he wanted to in the past, because times have changed and
Mhm.
it is part of who he is. And I would like to hope that if he were alive today, he would also want us to do this. He would want us to show who this man was in his entirety, including who was his wife and who was the rest of his family. Um, so do we have a statue?
Mhm. So we do. We have a really magnificent statue done by the highly esteemed sculptor and artist Robert Graham, and it sits in what is called the prologue room of the FDR Memorial. It is life size uh, on purpose, and I'll comment on that in a moment, but it's life size, and he is, of course, seated in a wheelchair. Behind him, there is a quote from Eleanor about the language then was not as sophisticated as now. She references Franklin's illness. You can substitute the word disability. That's what she meant. And talks about his never-ending persistence and perseverance and determination and patience. And that is now the first room that you go into when you enter the memorial. And it was made life size and away from the wall so that anyone, whether you are a wheelchair user or you use a cane or a leader dog or what have you, that you can 360 around that statue. You can touch it, you can interact with it. Shucks, I mean, people, I've heard about grown people plopping themselves on his lap for photos. So it is really, truly a remarkable piece of interactive art that truly celebrates, I think, also this other piece of him, which was a jovial, people-loving individual.
Yeah, and Eleanor Roosevelt, she is a wonder all in her own. I love Eleanor Roosevelt and some of her quotes and her wisdom. She was a very great first lady for the United States. Mary, when you talk about the illness, do you mind just exploring a little bit how did FDR wind up in a wheelchair?
Sure. He was a very active active guy. And so when he was, I believe the age was 39, 40, something like that. The story goes that he was swimming up in Campobello and started feeling a little odd in the water, or later on after he got out of the water. And by the way, I'm no Roosevelt scholar, but I've read enough and heard enough to be slightly informed. And by evening, a doctor was seeing him, and paralysis took over. And he was unable to move his legs. He was unable to move. He never walked again unassisted. The walking that he did was a real showman's act and determination of swinging around his hips and strength of his upper body to hold on to his son and a cane. But it is very interesting to read and learn about that experience of recognizing he had that disability, what he went through physically, emotionally. It is, it's a story that is very common and very relatable.
Right. And also had to be extremely traumatic. I mean, right now I'm walking this pretty hard path with my husband with dementia. It's a very hard path for my husband. It's also a very hard path for me and my grown children as well. But at the same time, it's making us all, it's trying to kill us, but it's making us all so much stronger. And so knowing that he had to walk that, and now he was a different person, think what he learned. We know what he would have learned about himself going through this journey. Excuse me if you don't know this answer, because I don't know it, but what age was FDR when he became president? And if you don't know it,
I
that's
think
sort
he
of
was well over. I think he was well over 50.
right.
So
And
yeah.
and I was wondering when he became paralyzed at 39.
Mhm.
He already been on his career at that point, and then he became president in his 50s. So he would have already been a wheelchair user for 10 plus years at that point, which I was just curious because one conversation that we talk a lot about in my company is the nuances of people that are born with disabilities as opposed to people who acquire disabilities during their life. For example, my daughter was born with Down syndrome, and so that's the way she was made. But my husband he was hit by a drunk driver as a child, and is now, that traumatic brain injury is causing his brain to age very differently. So he's acquired a disability as he's lived his life. But it's interesting because people react in different ways depending on that. So I always think that's an interesting point. But I know there has been some controversy. There's been controversy about this. Once again, it was a different time. FDR was downplaying the disability because society still felt that disability was a negative, which, by the way, society still does in a lot of ways. We're trying to change those, but at the same time, that was just the times. And so, do you mind just exploring with us a little bit more about the controversy?
Absolutely. And I'd like, before I forget to say this, I want to also recognize that there continues to be some controversy about FDR as a person. I mean, he as much as we like to think, oh, somebody in the past, it was always rosy times. Back when he ran for president, not everybody voted for him. Not everybody was the biggest fan of the New Deal. Not everybody remembers him as their favorite president. But there is certainly a very big constituency that he continues to have. So I would say that the desire to hold him up as somebody within the disability community came about as a result of the fact that, yes, he was by and large considered a great president, but also our nation had decided to spend millions of dollars to honor him. Um, and to do so without recognizing his disability. So I'm not trying to say that, should he have been this horrific individual and he used a wheelchair, would the fight still have happened for the, I can't, strip all that and discern that exactly. But the fact that he happened to have had a disability and the fact that that was being ignored really got stuck in everybody's craw. And that was, I think, a real motivator. So the controversy, though, back in the 90s was they all said FDR, he didn't want it. He wouldn't have wanted to be shown like what? I mean, he tried to hide it. And we kept pulling out more examples of when he didn't hide it. I mean, how can a person hide it when they are on record for establishing warm springs and living openly as a person with disability in warm springs? How can you hide it when you say, let's have the March of Dimes, right? He certainly didn't hide it when he visited the veterans in Walter Reed and stayed in his wheelchair. So I think part of the controversy is the ongoing stigma of being disabled that was being acted on, and the designs and thoughts behind how the memorial should look and feel is strength and that masculinity of how one, in the dominant culture would portray that. And so, our culture, disability culture, took that and put a spin on it and said, he was pretty damn strong. He was pretty damn effective. And, it just so happened the guy also sat in a wheelchair, couldn't move his legs. Did it matter? No.
Didn't stop him from leading. I also think it's interesting, especially in the time that we're in. Most of us know who the current president of the United States is, and I'm not going there. But of course, some of our presidents are liked better than others. I mean, we all have different opinions. That's why we're in the United States. We're a democracy. And so there are certainly presidents that I'm more fond of than other presidents, but I actually, which is funny what I'm about to say, but I actually really am proud of our presidents. Now, there's one president that I don't like and have never liked. And so it's funny because my logic that I've always applied, I'm gonna have to rethink it based on one of the presidents that I never wish was ever our president, but I'll also work on that in my own mind. But at the same time, I want to honor the history of the United States, all of it, all of it. I mean, we have some really ugly, bloody, horrible history. And it's not that I want to honor it, but I want to acknowledge it at a time when we are really acknowledging it. But I will also say, Mary, a couple of years ago, whenever it's definitely a couple of years ago, we were talking about Barack Obama becoming president of the United States. And we were all like, well, a lot of us were going, wow, he would be the first African-American president of the United States. And I remember having a conversation with some friends and they were like, all right, so we haven't had a woman. And we were actually doing the diversity and inclusion thing. If we had anybody that was LGBT, well, not openly, blah, 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 right? And somebody said, well, what about disabilities? And for a second, we forgot. For a second, we forgot. And then somebody was like, well, wait a minute, was it? And so I think if FDR was here now, based on who he was as a leader, I really believe he would say this. Let me tell you who I was. I was a person, he might not start with that. He probably won't. He was brilliant. He was married to a brilliant woman. Teddy Roosevelt, it was related to him. Blah, blah. There was a lot of, we're multidimensional human beings. And there's a lot of things that I am. And one of those things might be that I'm a wheelchair user. So I'm just really glad that y'all fought for this to be known, because even someone like me, I should always remember this, but I had forgotten in that one conversation years ago. And so I just think it's really important that y'all have stayed with it. So who has helped with the campaign and actually the
Mhm.
ultimate victory that you've had, which is you had this beautiful life-size statue of FDR in a wheelchair. But tell me more about the players and the leaders besides you, Mary, and others that have made this happen.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I'd love to just bounce off of something that you did mention about acknowledging history. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I, it's very important to us at the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee that we openly recognize that there are some elements to FDR's history that are less than savory. The Japanese American internment, a very challenging thing to wrestle with. His failure to sign the anti-lynching bill in order to retain the Southern Democrats, highly complex and challenging for one's mind given today. So how do we hold these complexities and competing complexities in our mind? Again, I'm not going to be able to solve them on my own. This is something that I'm reaching out actively to the community to help us all collectively make a reconcile with how do we present these stories into the future, because there are many marginalized and underrepresented stories related to the FDR and Eleanor legacy. One of which is what we're starting with, is the disability history. um, there is some about his disability, to our mind, not enough that represents and can be relatable to others, especially young students, about his disability experience, and also just learning about what he went through and how that might be something that could help inform their experience. Uh, but also the campaign itself, the fact that disability leaders fought the fight for a statue to be put in there so that in perpetuity people know this man used a wheelchair and he was president of the United States. And that would not be in our collective memory as much as it is right now, were it not for the fight by a lot of scrappy leaders from our community who, went, lifted, I don't know, when, what is every analogy you want to say, but did everything they needed to in order to make it happen. So you asked, who was involved.
And
Yeah,
Mary, before you
yeah,
before you do that, and I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but
no, please.
I really wanted to comment on what you said before you go to the heroes and talk about them. But
Yeah.
so you're saying that FDR's presidency wasn't perfect.
Mhm.
He made decisions with the people around him. He made decisions that certainly today and at the time would have been considered highly unpopular. But it sounds to me like you're describing a human being that's leading a very complicated country and very complicated times, and who knows what he was, and maybe we do have some of this historical, I'm sure we do have some historical knowledge, but I'm sure that there's things that, President Lincoln did that he wasn't proud of, that or that he had to do to keep, or George Washington, or Obama, or it go on. It tell me which president we've ever had. I'm just curious that was perfect, because
Yep.
it's all in the eyes of the beholder. So
Mhm.
FDR had some real horrible things happening when he was president.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, that's our history. So I find it interesting that, so we're going to not include who he is as an entire man because we didn't like some of the policy decisions that he made, even though at the time, what would you have done if you were leading? You know what I mean? So I think it's interesting that we ding him for being human
Mhm.
and say, yeah, because I remember one time seeing Donna Brazil, who Donna Brazil's a great leader in the United States. And I remember one time she was talking about something positive that she had done. And she said, I'm going to talk about this, but if you want to know what I've done wrong, Google me, because I've made so many mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, that is so true. As soon as I can,
Mhm.
oh, darn it, I can't do it. I have made so many mistakes. I've made mistakes in my life that have hurt other people. I have, I've tried never to actually hurt people on purpose, but sometimes I've made mistakes. I'm a leader. I'm taking, risks and chances. You do the best you can. So I just want to call a little bit of really on that, because he
Mhm.
was a human being in a very, very complicated time. And I'm sort of not sure what some of those things have to do with portraying this man as an entire human being that used a wheelchair and was a leader. And I
Mhm.
imagine tried really hard to be a really good president,
Mhm.
just like his wife did. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Once again, what is that? Throw stones at glass house saying. So I
Yeah.
just want to acknowledge that. That doesn't mean, even if we don't agree with policies that were done, that this man's life and work should not be remembered in its entirety. And that means in a wheelchair. So I just want to
Well
say
put.
that for FDR and for you, Mary, for the fight that you have, the work that you're doing. So now tell us about the other heroes.
Sure, thank you, and appreciate that very much. Um, well, it goes without saying that one of the most iconic figures of the disability community, who was very involved in and highly involved, and is in tons of photos and was at every rally, was Justin Dart, the godfather of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And I love his wife. Oh, she's so wonderful.
And shame on me for not mentioning Yoshiko herself at every rally, at every photo and what have you. So the two of them, the dynamic duo. My bosses were Alan Reich, who was the president and founder of the National Organization on Disability, and Mike DeLand, chairman of the National Organization on Disability. And so they were my two bosses. And then they hired a fabulous individual, Jim Dixon. Jim Dixon is a longtime community organizer. And he got hired to be the grassroots organizer for this campaign. And nobody better than Jim Dixon at that. And so those were some of the key leaders. But I could go on. Mick County, who was running United Spinal at the time, was highly involved. Nancy Flynn, who was married to Rick Douglas. Rick Douglas, who used to run the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities, he was involved. It really was a who's who. Dr. Joan Challenor, a DC historian and local activist woman who would just sort of, get involved and make sure that people knew. It was a tremendous group of individuals who kept just dropping, and that drop of water, and created the pool, which just kept getting bigger and bigger, and then finally, you know, the, finally people started capitulating. It's not every day that you take on. Well, let's see who's against us. Well, the White House. The U.S. Congress, you know. So
It
those are
just
some
makes
of
it just
the
makes us more determined to continue.
and it's
So
certainly.
and I do also want to remember to say this. I want to thank Meg O'Connell for introducing us, because I had heard about your work and I knew certainly about the FDR Memorial, but I didn't really know that much. And so I appreciate that she connected us so that I can help tell the story. And speaking of that, so what is the goal and the mission today of the FDR Legacy Committee? And I also want you to think about, as you're answering, have y'all been impacted negatively at all by what's happening with the pandemic or COVID-19? Has it hurt y'all with funding? One thing that I'm hoping to get out of this show is to make sure that any corporations that are watching this, they need support, they need funding, they need sponsorship, and including all of us. Doesn't have to be just corporations. If you agree that this legacy is important to our history, which I do, what can we do, Mary, not only with your current goal and mission, but really getting behind what you're trying to do, because I think it's very important.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Deborah, and for this platform. And I did want to mention that 16 grandchildren of FDR and Eleanor also joined our campaign back in the 90s. So that's a huge one. So we continue to salute them and their leadership. Yes, Corona has put everything, we're behind where we want it to be. Funders are moving slower. I mean, everything is just slowed down. And that's hard for an organization that is we're in a startup mode. And so we are, and of course, rightfully so, a lot of donors have pivoted to COVID. Rightfully, I understand that. But thankfully that'll be over, hopefully at some point soon. And I hope we can still, I mean, we will, but we don't want to be so far behind the 8 ball that we are just treading water for the period of time, because these stories, so here's really what I want to say is, this story of the fight for representation at the FDR Memorial is one that deserves to be told. Not just because it's nice, it's a nice story, but no, it needs to be embedded into curriculum that is taught in schools. We're aiming to first start with high school students, and then we'll go beyond that. But think about the story of self-advocacy, self-determination, the fight for representation, the conflict resolution skills. Everything is in this, and particularly for students with disabilities and any student who has to advocate for themselves, whether they have an IEP or not. And so our goal is to raise money in order to fund an educational curriculum that would be embedded into schools, piloted initially, and then put out throughout the nation, and also team up with to do a professional development session for teachers in Washington, D.C. A lot of entities do that. World War II does that. Other organizations will have, these teacher developments. We want to do that. How do you teach disability? I could go on and on about that, because there's lots of great teachers out there, but a lot of them don't come out of our community. They don't get the real sense. And finally, what I'd say is we have a partnership that needs funding with the University of the District of Columbia. They are our educational partners. And they are an HBCU. They are the only public university in Washington, D.C. We are turnkey. We are ready to go. But we need the dollars in order to turn the light on to make sure that we can start launching these things in 2021.
And so when you're talking about these things, which all sound really important, what kind of funding are we talking about for these projects?
I think it's pretty modest compared to some of the other projects that are out there that people receive proposals for. For 1 year of us piloting, just to let's get this stuff written, let's get it tested. We want to pilot it in DC, and there's a lot of wonderful reasons for that. But anyway, DC is a wonderful platform for that. So we're looking at an annual budget of about $280,000 a year.
So not a lot.
For our organization, and 99.9% of everything that we're doing is education related. And so that would buy us the opportunity to partner with UDC, and they have the educational expertise. They do. We also want to go homegrown. And they, of course, receive a huge percentage of their students are from DC public schools. They have great connections into the school. So them with many other partners, again, we can get this thing moving very, very quickly. And so we're really looking for companies to buy into the story of disability leadership, but also stories of leadership, period, whether it's disability leadership or what leadership, it's leadership. And we need that now more than ever in our country during all the strain and pain that we've been through.
Yeah.
And it's an easy, it's an easy thing, I hope, for people to believe in.
I agree. Well, and I think, we've already talked about this a little bit, but we need role models that look like us. And so if there is a little girl in a wheelchair in elementary school right now, she needs to know that she could actually grow up and be the president of the United States. We actually have a president-elect that is a woman, a Black woman, yay. But, and we've had a president that's in a wheelchair, yay. So this is so important to where we go, humanity goes forward. I would be curious, I'm a strategist, so excuse me, but have you ever done a crowdfunding? Because it also feels to me like society would get behind this. If I saw a crowdfunding project, which my company, by the way, is happy to help you do, Mary, but let society get in there and help. I mean, that's what we're seeing. I know there are a lot of corporations that listen to this show that would be delighted to help, but I think society should help. I think the community should help. And so doing a crowdfunding, which, when it really speaks to something that's changing society, as representation matters, once again, we can't say that enough. I think a crowdfunding campaign could really, really help as well. I always like to think of when you have something that you're doing that would certainly be good for corporations to support or universities to support, but individuals want to support it as well. So I would highly recommend a crowdfunding. Happy to help you with that offline too. But we really believe in that, because let society tell us if they think it's important or not. And I believe it's important. So just a thought.
Oh, well, we would welcome that. And we welcome all sorts of types of partnership and allyship. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to model some of the best examples of allyship. And for instance, when you mentioned we want to see people who look like us and representation matters, one of the things that, the disability story will always be bread and butter, our bread and butter. But one thing we're just itching to get to and work on is also the story of the influence of African Americans in the Roosevelt administration. Mary McLeod Bethune, a Washingtonian, she is called the First Lady of the movement. She and many others are cited for changing the perspectives of Roosevelt and Eleanor on so many things. I mean, let's get that embedded in curriculum. Talk about intersectionality. I mean, hello, we're there. So Helen Keller and FDR were good pals. In fact, she lobbied him for the talking book. So much so he said uncle, and he finally funded it. I mean, there are such rich stories that we just need to keep bringing into today and using them. And yeah, I'm all for crowdsourcing, and please, every person out there, sending some money, but I would like to say that, one of the things that we're pushing for is for appropriate use of federal funds for the memorial. The memorial is in terrible shape. It has received appropriations, but it's in terrible shape. And that's a whole other chapter, and everybody can come, and if you want to hear more about it, I'd be very happy to, speak offline more about it. But dollars that have been appropriated and have been set aside, sadly, let's just say that the memorial is not where it should be. Let's say also the inclusion and accessibility is not where it should be. And I am really looking at companies, because the charitable organization that works with the Park Service is called the National Park Foundation. They have a beautiful list of companies. God bless them. Some of them give $1 million a year. That's great. But we have the memorial that has the one and only known disabled president, and the water fountains don't work. There's no accessible formats for people to access Braille or alternate communication.
Wow.
And
that's
so
terrible.
let's talk, if we want to be real about what's, representation, then give me a call.
Well, speaking of that, tell us how they don't give your phone number out. You're a lot of people listen to this, but tell us your website, tell us on social media. You couldn't give your phone number out, but I just probably don't think
No
that
worries.
we get
You'll find me.
a lot of views of this show. I
That,
just always that's probably bad. But
absolutely. Look us up on the web. We are FDR Memorial Legacy.com. We are on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, either as FDR Memorial on some of them, on others, it's FDR Memorial Legacy. You'll find us. And we're kind of trying to be all over the place. We've got some great social
yeah,
media content. So I'd love for you to follow, y'all to come follow us and just join what we're doing. There's so many things that are available for, I mean, FDR is such a rich source of information and touch points, and so is Eleanor.
yes.
But we do need more allies. We need companies out there who are going to help us bring this story to today's market, to today's students in a way. I'll put it this way. You know, all those, D-Day and Pearl Harbor, those still need to get being taught. But let's get a few more lesson plans about, what Jim Dixon did in order to, and Justin Dart, to rally the troops to get people to care about this memorial. I mean, it's real, it's closer to their lives. And so I think we could really make some real great inroads with some students with this, a little more support.
I agree. And I think of like Brene Brown, for example, which I love her work. And she often quotes
Mm.
Eleanor Roosevelt. I've heard her quote her multiple times, and I love Eleanor's quotes too. Helen Keller, you mentioned, boy, she's got some beautiful quotes, and so does FDR. But I think looking at it from that angle too is important, because if you love what Eleanor did, support the FDR Memorial Legacy. If you love representation matters, intersectionality. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can support what you're doing. But I just wanted to make sure that we talked about it on the show, that we made sure that people understood what was happening or not happening. And also to me, this is not just about the United States, because I think the disability community around the world, we all need to celebrate our leaders that have disabilities, whether they disclosed them or not, because times are changing. So we've got to find the heroes, and we've got to really focus on the representation that represent our community. So I think that's one reason why I really wanted to, focus on what you're doing and see how we could help and make sure that people understood, because this is a global show. I still do have my largest audience in the US, the next in the UK, but then have a very vibrant global audience. And so I think it's important that we look at it from the human perspective of why it matters to all of us, to make sure we don't lose these really rich nuggets of history. So thank you so much, Mary. We appreciate you. We want to help. And I will make sure all the links are out there so that people can find you as well. So thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you for everything that you do in promoting and spreading the word and just keeping all of us on our toes and active. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Bye, everyone.